Ready when you are, Mark.
All right. It looks like we have Pato in the waiting room.
I'm here, so I'm a little confused by that.
Oh, hi, Pato. All right. Ready to get started?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Climate and Environment installment of the Year in Anti-Blackness series. My name is Mark Hughes, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd love to kick things off with some introductions. So my name is Mark. I work as an engineer on the battery side at a materials startup company called Sealand Nanotechnologies. I've also been involved with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, which is how I know Ryan. And I'm involved with employee resource group creation at my company as well for the Black employees, kicking off certain events like partnerships with the local school districts and Black arts celebration events as well. Pato, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, my name is Glisitse, and I'm joining you from Gaborone, Botswana. Really excited to be part of the conversation. I am the host of Sustain 267 podcast, and I have an interest in environmental issues and gender equity. I'm currently a master's student studying my development. I'm doing my master's in development studies. There we go. And I'm a member of the Global Shapers community. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Prosper, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. So I have been working in the energy sector, largely in West Africa, including Ghana. And I've been mainly working on the development of regulatory policies and strategies to increase the uptake of renewable and other sustainable energy sources. I have also been working on matters of international trades and looking at how energy can facilitate the efficient operationalization of the continental free trade area that is now the new baby in the corner. So these are the things that I've been working in, and my name is Prosper Ahmed Amukwando. I am the president of the World Energy Council's Future Energy Leaders. I also work at the Energy Commission as the inspector responsible for enforcing regulations, standards, and codes of practices in the renewable energy industry in Ghana.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Dominic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dominic Bednar, and I am a lot of things, but most recently, recent PhD graduate of the University of Michigan's Environment and Sustainability program in the School for Environment and Sustainability. And my work is largely on energy justice, but more narrowly on residential energy poverty.
Awesome, thanks for those intros, everybody. So to kick things off and speaking about anti-Blackness in the climate and the environment, I think, Dominic, what you just mentioned about energy justice could be a really interesting place to start. It's a topic that is newer to me, and I'm sure the audience would benefit greatly from having a discussion on that. So Dominic, if you don't mind, can you fill us in on what that term means and how it relates to addressing and eliminating anti-Blackness in the climate and environment space?
Yeah, for sure. So energy justice is a burgeoning movement, research area, and also an area of practice that has emerged out of the environmental justice movement in the late 70s, early 80s. And so energy justice is a new form of that, but particularly looking at energy-related injustices. Energy justice allows us to understand what are the benefits to people's energy generation, but also what are the burdens to energy generation. And so it allows us to really assess those impacts across the entire energy life cycle. Diana Hernandez, she is a faculty member out of Columbia University, and in one of her papers, she puts forth these 4 rights for really this call for energy justice. And in that, the first one including the right to healthy, sustainable energy production, the second one, the right to best available energy infrastructure, and the third one, the right to affordable energy, and finally, the fourth, the right to uninterrupted energy services. And so, as you can see, really ensuring that everyone has access to energy, that it's affordable, sustainable, and people can have access to that whenever they need it. Energy justice, principally though, has 3 core tenets that we discuss. One is this notion of distribution. And so again, how are the benefits and the burdens distributed across, that this could be like space, but also distributed across race, income, a number of different socio-demographic factors. A second tenet is procedural justice or process justice. So this allows us to understand what role do communities play in choosing their energy decision-making? And so how can people be a part of that process? And then finally, we have recognition justice. And so how do we recognize the distinctions between the types of energy that people consume? And so right now I am in Detroit, Michigan. And so energy consumed here is starkly different than South Florida or let's say Southern Africa. And so recognition justice allows us to understand those differences such that we can respond accordingly. And so that is a brief overview. I guess the second part of your question was like, why is energy justice important for us to think about combating anti-Blackness? I think those 3 tenets in and of itself allow us to, one, provide an analytical framework through which we can see these particular disparities. And I can speak on like my work, so some of my own work exploring racial, socioeconomic, and spatial disparities in residential energy consumption and efficiency in Detroit, Michigan. And so it allows us to take a more targeted approach to understand that, one, these particular communities are having the first and worst impacts, or the greatest impacts to climate change and climate breakdown. And so armed with that information, we're able to, respond better or more accordingly.
Awesome, thanks for that. That was a really great summary and breakdown. So I'd like to open a question to all the panelists. So within the regions which you live, which you work, which you operate, how does energy justice look? What are some of the key issues, the key opportunities that you're seeing in each of your respective regions?
Hi, Pato. I think you can take the lead. Ladies first.
I was actually going to say you take the lead because it's more of your area. Please do go first. You're the energy person.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for having me. I am very excited to be part of this discussion, especially being one of the founding members of the National Society of Black Engineers in Ghana. Now, as my faith influences what I do most of the time, and my Bible tells me that, God created all of us as human beings in his own likeness. He loves all of us, but we human beings, we have come to a point where we think some people are more human beings than others. And interestingly, the world thinks that the Black man or the Black woman is less of a human being than the white person. That leads us to campaigns like Anti-Blackness. And the whole issue about this Anti-Blackness is to, prick the conscience of the world that, look, we are all equal so that we can ensure inclusion in every other resource that God has blessed us with, including energy. So for us in Ghana or West Africa or Africa, we are all Black, but that doesn't mean that we do not have discrimination for energy in according to class or your geographical location. And the whole issue about anti-Blackness is to ensure inclusion. So in our part of the world, we do have that discrimination based on class or your geographical location. Now, we have taken a number of steps to ensure inclusion, hence energy justice. Now, it will be very interesting for you to note that, for instance, in Ghana, we have about 85% of our population having access to energy. The rest of the percentage, what do they do? And some of these people do not have access to energy because of their geographical location. Ghana is along the coast, and we have more than 300 islands. Now, on these islands, it is technically or engineeringly possible to extend electricity to these areas, but it is not economically feasible. But what do? Do you leave those people to stay in darkness? That will not, be the gap between various classes. So what Ghana has done, in fact, on the continent, we are leading in this, is to use or deploy renewable energy resources on the various islands. So we have deployed, solar and wind energy sources on about more than 5 islands. As I speak right now, we are in the process of constructing more on 3 islands. So these are some of the initiatives that government, with the support of the African Development Bank and the World Bank, are doing to bridge the gap between the various classes of our society to ensure inclusion in our energy sector and also ensure energy justice. And with this, we have been able to raise a number of people out of poverty. And remember, when you don't have access to energy, you know that, look, you will not be able to have access to economic opportunities, because energy, increases the economic opportunities that people, irrespective of their geographical location, particularly women and children, will be able to have access to. So these are some of the initiatives that Ghana has taken. In addition to deploying renewable sources of energy, we have also aggressively deployed virtual energy generation. This might sound very new to some of you, especially Ato, who is not primarily an energy person. Virtual energy generation is generating energy without constructing a power plant. And that is done through energy efficiency, energy conservation. And with energy efficiency and energy conservation, the amount of energy that one spends or utilizes reduces. So when we begin to utilize energy efficiently, then the amount of money you spend on energy, particularly the poor, will also reduce. And this helps in bridging the gap between the various classes and ensuring energy justice. Thank you, Mark.
Awesome. Do the other panelists have thoughts on what energy justice looks like in y'all regions?
I think my region is very like Prosper said, yes. I think our regions are very are quite similar in that we're lacking behind in energy, but we are trying to go for a push in solar energy. So with my little knowledge, I'd say energy justice would look like development, definitely, but development in a way that's environmentally sustainable, that also respects human rights. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say on that. And ditto to what Dominic and Prosper said.
I might add maybe just a few more things. And so I love the overview that Prosper provided. I think to build on that, like energy justice, moving in the future allows us to think about the world more globally as we continue to electrify, digify, or like how we're digitalizing things, but also how things are becoming more decentralized. And so thinking about the urgency of the climate crisis and of whom that's going to affect, we have to understand that there's going to be full out system transformation. And I'm going to take 2 seconds because I thought my laptop was plugged in and now it is, so we don't get disconnected. But thinking about this entire system transformation, here, particularly in the US, like we're thinking a lot about like electric vehicles and how we're going to completely electrify that, like the transportation space. Obviously in my space, like we're thinking about like energy efficiency and reducing energy consumption. But I think that stuff is important. But we also have to remember that like we need a strong like community engagement component to how we go about one, involving people actively in the process of moving to a low carbon or no carbon economy, but also how do we do so in a way that prioritizes communities' needs. And then finally, I'll say, I think it is important for us to also consider like what a notion of energy reparations could look like for Black and Brown people, and particularly for Indigenous people that have, like sacrificed their land for the production of energy.
Awesome. Thanks to all three panelists. Some great answers there. Switching gears a little bit, Pato, something that was mentioned on your Sustain 267 podcast, which everyone should certainly go check out. She was speaking with the Honorable Janine Mabunda from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, speaking about how the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because of vast resources of cobalt, really are the key to a clean energy transition, particularly when we're speaking about electrifying vehicles and really a clean environment transition altogether. As we think about the ways, though, that global North nations, such as the United States, the UK, much of Europe, have really taken advantage of resources in the global South to build their wealth on stolen land, the shadow of colonialism and the current realities of imperialism weigh very heavily on this opportunity with resources in the global South nations. So Pato, I wanted to ask, how can contemporary climate solutions within and outside of energy fight against that trend and really guard against the shadow of that legacy?
I think with that, we need to be, firstly, the conversations, the first step to that is that having honest conversations. What we're seeing now is we want to move to one thing. We're saying we want to move to one thing, but we're still putting money in another. And then if we're going to filter it down to the conversation of DRC, if currently the whole world is pushing for solar, and DRC is carrying the globe on its back. Yet DRC is one of the poorest nations in the world. It's got electricity penetration of, I think, around 15%, which is very, very unfair. And we're still extracting resources from them. And I think this can be done on two sides if we're really serious about actually having impact. The first one would be this cobalt is going to private businesses. It's going to your Apple businesses, your Apple manufacturers. It's going to your Tesla manufacturers. If they are honest about cleaning up their pipeline, their supply line, they maybe then need to go into DRC. Stop just going there, collecting the cobalt and leaving. How about setting up manufacturing industries there? That means you're hiring the people of the DRC. Not only are you hiring them, you're closer to the ground when it comes to manufacturing, which means you've got your eyes on the ground. You don't have child labor, and you can say that because you can see that you don't have child labor happening where you're buying your minerals. So in reference to the DRC specifically, I think the two would be moving their operations into Africa, instead of just being extractive, and two, policies. Yes, the DRC is, they've got a number of problems in terms of executing some of their policies, but remember, it's a two-sided item. We can't say that their leaders are corrupt if their leaders can't be corrupt alone if the buyers are buying clean coal, if their buyers are serious about buying clean cobalt. So because it seems like externally, it seems easier to implement their policies, those who are buying cobalt need to make sure that they're paying for clean cobalt. And then on our end as Africa, at policy level, we need to make sure that we are trying to produce as clean cobalt as possible and trying to do as little to no harm. Actually, trying to do no harm. And in our journey to no harm, we try to do as little harm. I think those would be the two items in terms of that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pato. Any of the other panelists have thoughts on this particular thread?
Mhm.
All right. One thing I think that you had mentioned that connects really nicely to something Dominic had brought up is the idea of not just purchasing resources and leaving, but really establishing manufacturing stations or places where folks can start to generate wealth based on the resources that they have, instead of being subjected to these more extractive sort of policies. And it really gets to this idea of community control and public control of a lot of the resources that they have. And so this is an open question to all panelists. What are some of the alternatives that we can look at that allow for that more public control along the same lines as like establishing manufacturing in these regions that kind of combat against those extractive, those more extractive practices?
I'm happy to go first. I think when doing business, definitely getting closer to the ground. Well, firstly, at policy level, once again, countries need to back their talk up with action. I'll give you an example. Recently, there was the G7 summit. Canada was there, we're going for clean recovery, just recovery, and so forth, and green recovery, and so forth. However, currently there's a Canadian company called Recon Africa that is looking at drilling for oil in the Okavango Delta. This is one of the most pristine areas in the world. It's got one of the richest wildlife environments in the world, but a Canadian company is looking at drilling oil there. If they're talking about a just recovery, but also on the other hand, they're drilling oil in Africa, that completely goes against everything that they're saying. So if they're going to commit to growing Africa and developing Africa, then let's do it in a sustainable way. Alternatively, if they have the money and they're serious and they in all earnest want to grow Africa, they could look at bringing in funding green projects. Currently, we've got a lot of money that's being put in towards solar generation and other projects that are more eco-friendly. And then the other thing is that's going to look at putting money into the pockets of locals is when investing, how much of it is actually going into the pockets of the people who are from there. A challenge that we're facing currently when it comes to investing on the African continent and all of that is that when you look at foreign investments, they're going to other white non-Africans who have come to Africa. So when you say a lot of money is being invested in Nigeria or in Kenya or in South Africa, it's being given to other Americans. So it's Americans giving Americans money, just that now they're in Africa. And then we say it's investing in Africa. But is it really? So as investors come in, they should also look to who is benefiting from the projects that they're funding. Or even if we just look at the work of CBOs, who exactly is at the receiving end of the money that you're putting in? How many locals are actually benefiting from this? I'll end it there so that Dominic and Prosper can also have a word.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. We have long been looking at strategies on how the local communities can benefit from their God-given natural resources that they don't have the technologies now to exploit, but depend on external investment and technology to exploit these resources. In most times, these people do not actually benefit from the exploitation of their resources. Rather, if you use Nigeria, the Niger Delta as an example, and other parts of the world, the exploitation of these resources actually adversely impact on their livelihoods, like their water bodies, their soils, and even the quality of air. So in Ghana, like many other parts of the continent, we've been looking at other ways. The first strategy has been the traditional one, corporate social responsibility. Then before they start the project, they will promise even everything, including the moon, as part of their corporate social responsibilities. But after the completion of the project, if I'm interested, that's what they do. They would start, fulfilling their part of the corporate social responsibility after the completion of the project. So when they finish, after the completion of the project, they will then reneging on some of the promises with all manner of reasons why they will not be able to build that school to the standard that they promised on paper, why they will not be able to provide the scholarship to that amount of money that they promised before they started the project. Now, so we realize that corporate social responsibility is actually not working very well. And some of these investors or companies unfortunately connive with some government agencies and personalities to dupe their own people. So we realize that corporate social responsibility is not a viable way of ensuring that the communities benefit largely from their own God-given resources. The second thing that government tried to do, or the various countries try to do, especially Ghana, is to pass local content regulations or laws requiring a percentage of the investment or ownership to come from local people. But in fact, I have always looked at this strategy to be synonymous to, Mark, you cutting off your nose and giving you a rose flower to smell at the same time. Because the people, their economic state does not empower them to be able to contribute, let's say, $20,000 or $20 million into a multi-million venture. So this is just a defeatist approach. And I can tell you, we are still struggling to actually implement or enforce our local content regulations and laws in Ghana. Number three, realizing that corporate social responsibility has not been a viable initiative. Number two, the local communities do not have the financial wherewithal to actually contribute a percentage into the investment. We looked at, actually using their lands as equity. They do not have the cash to contribute in that investment, but they have the land. They have the water bodies. They actually have the oil. So what we've been advocating for is, look, these local communities don't have the Esau mentality that you want to get cash right now, finish spending the cash, and deny future generations of the opportunity from benefiting from the natural resource. We say, look, use your land and other resources as equity contributions into the whole venture. Some people have tried it. It has worked. Unfortunately, inadequate leadership within those communities has actually resulted in making people not to benefit from those from their natural resources. For instance, the company, like, dividends are paid to the communities, but the community leaders mismanage the dividends paid to them. So what we've been trying to stop all around is what is being perpetuated. Now, the final thing that we have advocated for to ensure that local communities do benefit from their natural resources is for government to enforce the financial regulations. The companies must be made to pay their corporate taxes. If they are given tax incentives, those tax incentives must be in accordance with what has been agreed in law or from negotiation. Environmental regulations must be enforced without fear or favor. And when these things are done, the adverse impact of these industrial activities on the communities will be minimally reduced, if not eliminated entirely. And there are some companies who do pay their taxes, comply with all the financial regulations, but poor leadership, lack of accountability and transparency in the expenditure or the usage of those resources or financial resources also brings us back to, leading us to communities not benefiting very much from their natural resources. So these are some of the strategies that have been put in place. And I've talked about some of the challenges with some of those strategies, as well as opportunities for growth. We don't say weaknesses. My professor in Oxford told me that you say opportunities for growth, not a weakness.
Thank you for that, Prosper. I will probably just add a few things, and one, situating them within like this larger framework of, and so to answer the question, what are alternatives to more extractive practices? I think we have to more systematically think about what extractivism looks like across the, again, the energy life cycle, and talk about this notion of a just transition, and like what is a just transition. And so knowing that we have to move to a low to no carbon economy, a low to no carbon environment to ensure the future for generations to come, we have to think about how do we transition our energy resources in a way that are centered on principles of justice. And so we could decide today, let's say we decommission all the coal plants and we'll install all the renewables. But if we decide to install solar farms on, let's say, indigenous land, or we continue to extract cobalt from the Congo without, proper mechanisms in place, like that isn't a just transition. Like that just continues the same old system that we've had from the start. And so Movement Generation has this really beautiful framework that I encourage you all to go check and look out, that really helps. It beautifully displays like what this notion of an extractive economy looks like, and moving towards a living economy or a regenerative economy, one that centers care and sacredness of the land and of the earth and of the people, but also this deep notion of cooperation. And so, doubling down on what Pato mentioned, really we have to like be on the ground, like we have to be deeply engaged in community work and allow that to be a guiding principle for communities to be able to characterize their own solutions, but also hold space and provide resources for them to help innovate, characterize their own problems and provide resources to help them characterize their own or innovate their own solutions. And so I'll pause with that.
Awesome. Thank you, all three panelists. That was a great thread there. One thing that kind of came to mind to me as you all were speaking, I think it's directly related to something Prosper had mentioned with like corporations, financial regulations not really being enforced at a level that's necessary to really make sure that the communities are being, the communities are benefiting from a lot of these practices, is this legacy of anti-Blackness, not just being direct action, but also inaction, to ignoring a lot of these pitfalls that kind of allow a lot of these systems to kind of stay in place over time. And so it's a multi-pronged sort of thing where, Dominic and Pato, where you're talking about direct action of like being on the ground, being with these communities. And the other side of that coin too is making sure that folks are not being ignored and things, loopholes are not being exploited, things of that nature. So it's a wide-ranging sort of transition that we're looking at here that I think is a really interesting way to kind of fully complete that sort of conversation, addressing action as well as addressing inaction. So one other thing on that topic too that I wanted to talk about was this idea of the system having to change. I think, Dominic, as you were mentioning, and how technology really isn't enough to really get us over the hump. Can we talk about some of the ways that like an over-reliance on technology has really put us at a disadvantage to really addressing anti-Blackness and extractive policies?
Okay, so I'm happy to go first again. Can you hear that noise in my background?
No.
Okay, great. So on just the anti-Blackness of moving towards technology, I think I read somewhere, or I heard somewhere, that technology is really, if we're not careful, going to further the divide of those who have and those who don't. And we're already starting to see it happen in the most basic ways. I recently had to get a COVID test when I was traveling, and I was outside the country. And for me to register to take this COVID test, I had to register online, and then through online, they had to send me something. I had to have a local number. It was just something where I'm there, you're there, you stick it in my nose, and we call it a day. And they wanted to put technology in where it's not necessary, which just led to making my life more difficult because it just looks fancy. We need to be careful of investing in systems that are fancy but not necessarily effective. We're seeing that with a lot of climate solutions currently. A lot of money is being put into really, really fancy systems that make the color in the clouds bounce, and then the angle that it refracts at, when it's really, really expensive programs that are, one, not scalable, two, very pretty on paper. They look amazing when you talk about them in the on Forbes magazines, but they're not as effective as solutions that have been driven by Indigenous people for years. They're not as sustainable as, well, a lot of Indigenous knowledge. Right now, we're pushing for, when we look at carbon sinks, for example, we're looking at growing trees. And then in looking at growing trees, I recently read a very infuriating article that talked about how a university, I forget the name now, but I recently saw the tweet again, how they've put all of the resources in trying to get a village in Ghana to stop using firewood and blah, 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 because their carbon footprint, which is infuriating, because it's like, you're looking at mitigation on the African continent. The African continent, sub-Saharan Africa, contributes 3 to 5% of carbon emissions. If Africa was carbon neutral, would still have 95 to 97% of emissions present. So with such solutions, like, no, let's go and mitigate. Let's go and mitigate, let's go and put technology in place that people can't even access because they don't have electricity. Are you really looking at solutions, or are you looking to show off? Are you looking to actually change lives, or are you looking to have a report that financiers will find very happy with and put more money into your project? So I think those are some of the things that we need to be cognizant of as we move forward. And then earlier you touched on propping up anti-Black systems. Some of these solutions, you touched on this, Dominic, of where are you building the solar plants? We're seeing a huge problem currently as we push for more tree planting and tree growing. People with carbon sinks, with carbon credits now becoming a business, it's leading to people displacing Africans from their indigenous lands because they want to create forests and sell carbon credits. So once again, solution, but maladaptation. What effect is it having on the ground? What are these fancy carbon sinks? Let's sell carbon credits so that global northern rich countries can now pay for licenses and passports to continue to litter, to continue to ruin our environment while Africans pay the bill. And yeah, that's where I'm gonna end.
Please, Dominic, I'll be happy for you to go.
Sure. So I think definitely when we're talking about system change and and obviously technology isn't enough, but I think it definitely warrants us saying that there is an importance to technology and thinking about how it's enabled us to think about how we're able to sorry, I'm checking behind my dog's making a little noise. But I mean, one, like technology has enabled us to do things a lot faster, a lot greater, and to process a lot more data far more quicker than we've ever been able to. And so it certainly is a resource. But like Pato had mentioned, we do have an over-reliance. Even like I love the COVID example, and I think about just how there's an over-reliance on even like it's troubling for a lot of folks to schedule a COVID exam or to schedule a COVID vaccination because you have to go through some particular system. But I think it's also important to note that, again, just doubling down, like we need community efforts through and through. And like when you don't have community engaged in learning new technology, then we continue to reinforce the structural barriers that prevent Black folks and people of color from kind of entering these spaces. And so, especially with a lot of automation, that can be particularly troubling if those particular perspectives aren't included to understand like what we're looking for and how we plan to develop in this hyper changing environment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pato and then Dominic, for those wonderful inputs. And it's this question of the employment of technology to, as a panacea to all our problems has always been coming up and up and up again. And you see, I always give an example, and my examples are influenced by where I was brought up in a village, where I never saw electricity until 1998, and when I was growing up as a child, we had plywood boards painted black, and we used to write on them with chalk. I don't know whether you guys can, my colleague panelists and then Mark can relate with what I'm saying. You have a plywood painted black and you write with chalk. There are times that we don't even have access to chalk, and then we resort to dry cassava to write on them. Now imagine a government comes out with a policy that, look, they are going to phase out writing on chalk. And as I was writing on chalk, I had no electricity in my village. I was using kerosene. So imagine a government coming to say that, okay, technology, we have to be abreast with technology. So all slates are going to be phased out, and now every student in the country is going to write using tablets, Apple tablets. Imagine I don't have access to electricity, and government wants me to now use Apple tablet as an instrument of education. This is just an example of how technology can disincentivize or actually disenable some aspects of our society if a lot of thought is not put into it. Now, you see, when I talk about the context when I talk about our context, we really don't have a lot of anti-Black sentiments, as I indicated in my initial remarks, but we do have sentiments that are similar to anti-Black sentiments about issues about inclusion, discrimination. You get a point. And I can tell you, having stayed in California, having stayed in Arizona and Washington, D.C., yes, in fact, California, they say Silicon Valley, that's the center of technology in the US. But I experienced, I saw people who did not have access to, the technology within California. Now, how can technology be used, to be able to enable people as far as, ensuring inclusiveness and ensuring sustainable extractive policies? We are not saying that. Having said this, my notion is not that technology is entirely bad. If you look at a technology like M-Pesa or the mobile money technology within Africa, it has actually empowered rural women and men, to be able to access financial economic opportunities. That is an advantage or a good thing about technology. The second thing is, as some of you might have heard, for the past years, government has been grappling with unsustainable mining practices that we have called galamsey. It has caught international attention. It is spoiling our water bodies. And if care is not taken, Ghana will begin importing water from either Togo or other countries. Now, technology has been able to reduce these unsustainable practices, like reducing the traces of mercury that is left in the water bodies mining. You get a point. So this is one, example of a useful application of technology. As I indicated, technology is not a panacea. For instance, technology cannot address equity issues. Technology cannot address equity issues, and all our anti-Black sentiments calling for sustainable extractive policy is to address the issue of equity. As I indicated earlier on, some of the strategies that we have put in place to ensure that equity issues are addressed. Number two, technology, as Dominic also indicated, cannot be replaced by replaced for civic engagement, civic responsibility, and civic action of citizens. Because sometimes to actually address issues of equity, you have to embark on civic action. You must take up your civic responsibilities. And we saw it in the 1960s when Dr. Martin Luther King and his compatriot took up civic action to be able to get certain policies passed. The other thing is technology in connection with equity. Technology cannot address issues about using arable lands to deploy solar farms. In our attempt to address energy justice, we end up instituting unjust activities. Like people have their farmlands, that's actually providing food for them. That's what they use to feed their communities and their families. Then we come and say, oh, we are trying to ensure energy justice, sustainable transition into a low carbon future or a low carbon society or economy. And we end up taking people's arable land for these purposes. So for me, technology is not a bad thing to say, but the way it is deployed must be thoroughly looked at. And my recommendation is, whatever technology you are deploying, it must be deployed in a way that it is consistent with the people's culture, their way of life, their practices, which are not entirely bad, because sometimes we are made to believe that practices from the West are better than practices that we already have in our indigenous communities. So whatever technology it is, whether it's a mobile money technology, it's sustainable extractive technology, or issues about enforcing regulations, it must be in line with the tradition, the way of life, and the practices of those communities. Thank you.
Mark, can I just throw in something there? I think from what Prosper was saying, what we can all agree on is that technology is not bad, but we need people-centered policies, solutions, development, and growth. All of it has to be people-centered.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Well, thank you so much, panelists. This was a fantastic conversation with lots of threads. I certainly learned a lot. For the last 10 minutes here, I'd like to shift this over to audience Q&A. So if folks in the audience have questions, please use the hand raise feature, and then Ryan will call on people to ask questions for the panelists. If not, I have another question. Well, I have lots of questions, but I'd love to give the audience a chance. All right. If there are no questions from the audience, I think one thing that I would also love to touch on here, Dominic, something you had mentioned that I really liked in a previous conversation that we had, is thinking about confronting anti-Black racism, focusing on collective joy and collective organizing as a joyful experience. And so maybe a question for the panel here is, how does joy fit into the solutions and the world that we're crafting here?
I can go first. Thank you for that question. I think joy has to be omnipresent throughout everything that we do. And that's not to say that we can't honor other emotions like sadness and anger and, like frustration. But I think a critical part of combating anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism for me is to think about the more restorative work that needs to happen for us to fully show up and to be able to do the work to ensure the clean energy transition. And from like a very like fundamental like physics standpoint, like energy is like the capacity for us to do work or for anything to do work. And there are multiple types and forms of energy. It can't be created nor destroyed, only transferred from one type to another. But power, a lot of people confuse with energy, is really the rate at which we use power. And so it's a rate. And we think about like our own power to shift the narrative, to engage in this work deeply. It requires us to have energy and to have time. And so how we spend that energy and how we spend our time is really important for us to think about how powerful we actually are. And for me, a lot of that includes going out dancing, like moving my body, like engaging in yoga, organizing with friends around brunches, and even during the pandemic, thinking about like the ways that we can collectively come together to celebrate, to laugh, to have a good time, because otherwise, I mean, those things stress you out. Those things wear on your body. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of, like centering that joy, and out of that, comes this collective responsibility to deeply engage in the problems that we do have, such that, like we're building rapport, building relationships. But when disagreement happens, because it will, we don't engage in that, like fiercely, like that type of conflict is generative and leads us to something that we otherwise wouldn't have arrived at before.
Okay, so on joy, so I love to be happy. I actively seek out joy. I am very active. I travel and but in relation to the work that we're talking about today, I think it's important to find joy in the work that we do. A lot of people who work with, a lot of Black people who work within climate and environment, especially in climate justice advocacy, are volunteers. And we need to look at how do we make that a safe space for them? How do we make it a joyous space for them? And then tying it back to what you said earlier about it being an anti-Blackness. We're seeing, I don't know if it's just in Africa, but we're seeing a lot of work in this area for Black people is unpaid. There's a lot of exploitation in this area. There's a lot of volunteer for experience. If you were passionate about the cause, you'd put your hours in for free. And this is being said to you by someone who's calling you on their work iPhone with their Wi-Fi that their company pays for. But anyway, I think we need to create a safe space so that people can be joyous in how they do the work and be able to laugh and be carefree. And that means taking care of people physically. Have people eaten? Do people have transport to get wherever they need to go for demonstrations? Mentally, what kind of space are you in? If you're working in a company that's as most NGOs are here, led by white people who every day are coming down on you with microaggressions and so forth, how are you addressing that? So yeah, taking care of people physically, mentally, and then everyone can be joyous, and then we can be happy at our marches, looking for climate justice, and yeah.
Thank you, Pato and then Dominic. You know, as I indicated earlier on, whatever we do, or I in particular do, I always go back to the first question. And the first question of life is, what is your purpose on this earth? And for me, as a Christian and having been a Muslim, the purpose is to bring God pleasure, to worship him. And to be able to do that, you know, we got to do whatever we are doing, our professional life, climate justice, energy transition, we got to do it to the best of our ability. But now, you cannot do these things to the best of your ability when you are made to feel inferior. When you're not happy, when there's no joy, you're not doing it in joy or in fact, if there's no joy, I actually wonder whether there would be anything like love. So issue about joy is very important. And going back to, you know, religious sentiments, even God himself said, look, there is no Gentile, there is no Pharisee. Every person is created equal in my image, and they are all my children. So for one sect of the society thinking that because they are not Black or they are white, they are more superior than other people, it will not, you know, make it possible for all of us to come together, work for the, you know, for the sustenance of the whole world, for the glory of God. And I tell you, whites alone cannot complete God's assignment on earth. No, neither can Blacks alone do that. So actually need to create the enabling environment that will create the joy amongst us. And I can tell you, if you're working in team and there is love, everybody gives up his or her best. And that together saves our planet. And remember, climate change does not discriminate between white or Black. Climate change does not discriminate between the haves and the have-nots. Climate change does not discriminate between middle class, upper class, or the lower class. So it is very important that we put in place policies and measures and practices that would, you know, stop this segregation or tending to believe that some people are more human than others, so that we can work together to save this planet. Even if we are not able to save it within our generation, we will be able to hand over that baton, leave a legacy for the next generation that will make their work easier to be able to save this planet and serve in joy.
Awesome, great answers, panelists. As we come to the close here, I just wanted to quickly mention we'll be circulating a feedback form, key takeaways document, and a video recording of this discussion by email. And if anyone in the audience hasn't already, please join our mailing list using the same link that you did to RSVP to this event. And maybe as we close here, with all the, you know, the information that was given here and all the different perspectives that we talked about, maybe what's one thing that audience members can do to kind of take action here, you know, to take a step towards, you know, crafting this new world?
Okay, I'll go first. So the work that I do is primarily around communicating climate change, which is what my call to action and my solutions will be around. So the first thing for me would be listen. This is across just climate action. The first thing for me would be listen to climate action. Well, listen to African voices and their stories. And more importantly, listen to the stories that they tell with their voices. So follow them on social media. If you're curious about something that's happening in a particular African country, read their blogs, listen to their podcasts, share their work, and yeah, in academia, cite African scholars. We've got, there was recently a list of 1,000 top scientists top climate scientists that was published. 1,000. Of the 1,000, only 5 were African. Of those 5 Africans, all of them were old white men. And one of the measures for this list was how often they're cited. So it really does count within academic circles that we cite them. And then when donating, if you're in a position where you can give money, get that money as close to the ground and implementers of the project as possible. And yeah, that'll be the last thing. So, and then how you can actually do this, practical ways of doing this, you can listen to Sustain 267 podcast, which I host, which is conversations around climate change with Africans, strictly African voices. And then if you want to support it, you can become a patron for our podcast. I think in the mailing list, Mark, you'll share the link. And yeah, that's my call to action. Listen to African voices.
Thank you for that. I will add, in addition to listen to African voices, listen to Black voices and, you know, voices just across the diaspora about the issues that are affecting them locally. If you are interested in engaging, like wherever you are in the world, just like see what's happening, see what people are already doing. Like if you have an idea like, oh, like I want to support in this way, or like I want to, you know, be a climate change warrior, or climate justice, environmental justice, energy justice. There are people already doing that important work. And so find those people and figure out the ways that you can best support those particular organizations, those particular communities, because it is, you know, just really important to honor the legacy and history of the work that people have already been doing. Secondly, I know, especially just considering the utility landscape in the United States, I think it's really important for folks to just figure out like what's happening at your Public Utility Commission. That is where a lot of kind of like rate cases go, or a lot of just like how different utilities are thinking about pricing for utility structures, new energy generation plants. And so that is a mechanism for folks to also deeply engage in, as well as when we're thinking about energy affordability and energy access. And finally, I would just say, again, just on the spirit of joy, find what moves you. Maybe it's not directly climate related, but I almost can assure you that there is a climate and environment component to that. Dr. what is her name? Rhianna Anderson, she's at the University of Michigan. She had said something that was really encouraging to me, and I know in other folks, is, you know, when we're thinking about doing this work, it's important for us to stay in our lane and stay on our level. And so doing what you can and not, you know, seeking to overextend yourself is really important for us to think about doing this work.
Thank you very much, my colleague panelist. To answer the question, I think initiatives like this one, you know, the Anti-Black Racism series should continue. It's a laudable idea because it's through this we are able to connect with those on mainland Africa and those in the diaspora. We are able to connect, share ideas, empower ourselves, and fashion out strategies on how to actually, you know, achieve the goals of Anti-Black Racism campaign and achieve issues of, address issues of equity. So such initiatives should continue. The other thing is that, look, we pay our taxes as citizens, and the expectation is that we'll go and sleep and the government will do everything, ensure that our welfare is taken care of. We are joyous in our attempt to serve our country and serve God. But from my experience, and I think all of us don't trust the government. We got to take our destiny into our own hands. I work with government, and I can tell you that you don't have to trust government. So we need to take up our destiny into our own hands. And how do we do that? Look, we sit here on Zoom and speak very good English, you know, good technology. But the masses of the people who have been affected by these things are the people in the rural communities. Let's get to the ground. Let's engage them. Let's empower them. Whatever local language we need to speak and empower them, let's do it. And when we do that, they would support us to be able to fight that battle. And let's remember, look, Today, we are dealing with economic refugees. People are running away from Somalia to Germany, to Europe, to seek, economic opportunities. And we are already grappling with it. Now, look, we think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's wait when the dangers or the negative impacts of climate change sets in, where the world will now be dealing with climate refugees. That is when we realize that we had better taken action today than to wait. So these are my parting comments, and I want to congratulate everybody. And it's a great privilege getting in touch with Dominic, Pato, and then Mark to have this conversation. And I'm looking forward to the second part of it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Prosper, Dominic, and Pato for joining this conversation. And thank you, audience members, for joining. We had a really great talk. Again, be on the lookout in your email for a feedback document, key takeaways, and then a video recording as well. And yeah, once again, join the mailing list at linktree/action2021. Yeah, this was fantastic. I had a great time, and I hope you all did as well. Thanks again, everybody.